The crystal glass slipped from my hand and exploded against the marble when the man in the dark suit spoke his final words. For a moment the room froze. The laughter, the clinking forks, the smug faces of my family all suspended in disbelief. Just 20 minutes earlier I had been their punchline again. The failed son. The brother who never measured up. The teacher. And now, with a set of trembling papers pressed into my hand, I held the power to undo every smirk that had ever been aimed at me. My name is Nathaniel Graves, though in my family, I was only ever called the mistake. I walked away from a trust fund and boardroom promises to teach history at a public high school. At 29, I earned just under $55,000 a year, while my brother Julian Graves was celebrated for pulling in 7 figures before his 32nd birthday. My mother, Catherine, never let a soul forget it. She introduced me at charity galas with the same tone one might use for a terminal diagnosis. This is Nathaniel. He teaches. Public school. The pause was always deliberate, her way of sharpening the knife before she slid it in. My father, Edward Graves, the great self-made patriarch, loved to boast that he'd built Graves International with nothing but grit and a loan the size of a used car. Today, that empire stretched across continents valued north of 70 million, and tonight at the annual Graves Thanksgiving, a gathering less about gratitude and more about profit margins, Julian was finally crowned heir to the throne. The perfect son. The golden child. My seat, as usual, had been tolerated, not welcomed. But then came Harrison Cole, the man in the black suit. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words carried the weight of dynamite. The documents in my hand revealed a truth no one in that mansion had suspected, not even me. For 3 months, the company they all worshipped, the one my father built and my brother worshipped, had been mine, transferred, signed, and sealed. I was the legal owner of Graves International, and I hadn't even known it until this night. The shatter of that champagne glass still echoes in my head because it marked the instant the dynasty began to fracture. Catherine's hand tightened around her wine stem. Julian's smirk slipped and Edward's face turned a shade of ash I'd never seen before. In that silence, they realized their empire no longer belonged to them. It belonged to me, the failure, the teacher, the brother they'd mocked into silence. That was the night the Graves family empire began to die, and the hammer was already in my hand. I pulled into the long gravel drive at exactly 4, because arriving even a few minutes late was considered a sin in the Graves household. Punctuality is the seed of success, my father used to bark, and lateness was treated like a moral failing. The estate rose before me, a monument of brick, glass, and vanity spread across 3 acres of Connecticut wealth. Every glowing window gave the illusion of warmth, though I knew better. The air inside was always colder than the November wind. My Honda Civic sputtered and coughed before stalling out in the driveway, its death rattle echoing against a lineup of cars worth more than entire neighborhoods. Julian's white Tesla gleamed in the center spot, of course, polished so perfectly it reflected the mansion's sharp edges back at me. Around it sat my mother's Mercedes, my father's prized Bentley, and a scattering of BMWs and Audis belonging to cousins and in-laws. My car, covered in road dust, looked like it had wandered into enemy territory. Nathaniel's here. My cousin Lila's voice carried from the foyer the moment I opened the door. She said it as though she were announcing bad weather, unavoidable, inconvenient, and bound to ruin someone's mood. Then, with a smirk sharp enough to cut glass, she added, "The teacher made it." Lila loved her pharmaceutical marketing job, boasting that her campaigns helped people live longer, though everyone knew they were designed to squeeze every last dollar out of the sick. She wore her ambition like jewelry, paired with a smile that never touched her eyes. Her husband Thomas was nearby, already laughing at his own stale jokes about tax brackets and stock options. He always delivered them as if humor were another form of conquest. The scent of roasted turkey drifted through the house, layered with perfume, cologne, and the familiar undertone of leather and bourbon that clung to the walls like the family's legacy. The corridor to the great room was lined with framed milestones, snapshots of triumphs that told the story of the Graves dynasty. Julian's Harvard graduation photo occupied the central place, his diploma held like a crown. Next came the ceremony marking his promotion to vice president, then the ribbon cutting at the new Hong Kong office. Each frame glistened with pride. My pictures, on the other hand, grew smaller with each passing year, shrinking until my presence was nearly erased. In the last family portrait, I stood half hidden behind an ornamental palm, my face blurred in shadow. When I stepped into the great room, Julian was exactly where I expected him, posted by the marble fireplace, whiskey in hand, his voice commanding a semicircle of uncles. They leaned in as he spoke about quarterly projections, global markets, and inevitable expansion, their laughter punctuating his every clever turn of phrase. He looked like a king in waiting, while I was the unwanted witness to his coronation. Julian stood near the fireplace in a charcoal suit that looked like it had been stitched from someone else's yearly salary. The cut was sharp, the kind of tailoring that whispered money even before he opened his mouth. His wedding ring flashed beneath the chandelier as he gestured mid-story, spinning some tale about dismantling a rival firm. "The secret is pressure," he told Uncle Vernon, who nodded with the solemnity of a disciple, though everyone knew Vernon's mattress stores hadn't turned a profit in years. "You find where they're weakest, you lean in, and sooner or later they fold." My father, Edward Graves, sat in his wingback chair, his throne, bourbon in hand, the Wall Street Journal tucked at his side. No one else dared sit there, not even when the room was empty. He granted me a 1-second nod, acknowledgement stripped of affection, before refocusing on Julian's performance. Edward had perfected the trick of making you feel transparent while staring straight through you. From across the room, my sister Claire waved, the only spark of genuine warmth I'd felt since stepping inside. A cardiac surgeon at Mount Sinai, she carried the kind of purpose most people could only dream of. She literally held lives in her hands, but somehow even her brilliance dimmed beside Julian's boardroom triumphs. In our mother's kingdom, saving a heart was admirable, but commanding markets was divine. Catherine Graves drifted through the crowd like a conductor with a hidden whip, her cream dress cutting a clean line through clusters of conversation. She adjusted flowers that didn't need adjusting, straightened frames already level, corrected details no one else noticed. Order, appearances, hierarchy, she curated them all. "Nathaniel," she said without really looking, her eyes already sweeping past me. "You'll be at your usual spot by the kitchen doors. We need clear passage for the servers, not staff, not catering. The servers, as if people carrying trays of food were no different than appliances rolling on wheels." "Good to see you too, Mom," I said, but she had already moved on, scolding my cousin Roland for his tie choice. Even though he personally managed more capital than half the room combined, I drifted through the sea of conversations. Aunt Patricia boasting about her latest nonprofit appointment that came with more status than work. Uncle Jerome lecturing on yacht upkeep as if seawater had anything to do with his actual life. Every exchange was a duel in disguise, every anecdote a flex meant to stake out territory in the family's endless contest of significance. "How's the teaching?" Uncle Vernon finally asked, his voice pitched loud enough to draw attention. The word teaching landed in the room like a punchline no one wanted to laugh at, but everyone understood. The way you'd ask about a lingering illness, I thought, as Uncle Vernon leaned in, swirling his whiskey. "It's going well," I told him. "One of my students just got into Columbia on a full scholarship." "Columbia," he repeated, dragging the word out like he was testing its weight. Then he took a slow sip and smirked. "Well, at least someone in your circle is going somewhere." The dining room waited just beyond, gleaming with formality. The table stretched long enough to seat a board meeting, set with Waterford crystal and sterling silver my mother claimed traced back to the Mayflower. I doubted it. Estate sale finds, most likely, from some vanished family whose legacy Catherine had repurposed as her own. 20 settings for 18 people, because in this family appearances always outran reality. This was Thanksgiving at the Graves estate. Tradition wrapped in glass and linen, excess dressed as heritage. And in half an hour the whole performance would crack. Dinner began with my father's annual toast. Edward Graves rose with deliberate care, tapping his crystal against a silver spoon until the conversations died. The chandelier light caught his face just enough to highlight the creases around his mouth. The fatigue he usually hid beneath bourbon and bravado. "Family," he began, voice still carrying that familiar boardroom authority even here. "For over 30 years I have built Graves International from a single warehouse in Newark into a global force." His gaze swept the table, but it landed inevitably on Julian. "Tonight we mark the next chapter." Julian adjusted his cufflinks, feigning surprise, though he'd been waiting for this coronation all year. Catherine pressed a hand to her chest as though her heart might leap out from pride. The gesture rehearsed down to the angle of her fingers. "Effective Monday. I'll be stepping down as CEO," Edward declared, his tone heavy but resolute. "And my son Julian will assume leadership of Graves International." The board confirmed it unanimously yesterday. The room erupted in applause. Chairs scraped back, glasses lifted. Julian rose, that polished grin spreading across his face like oil on water. "Thank you, Dad," he said, his voice smooth as the suit on his shoulders. "I promise to honor everything you've built and take it further. We're already projecting a 40% growth increase over the next 2 years." Uncle Jerome raised his glass high. "To the next generation of Graves excellence, everyone drank except me." The champagne fizzed against my tongue and turned sour before I set the glass down untouched. Then Catherine stood, her own flute raised, eyes gleaming as though she were anointing royalty. "To Julian," Catherine announced, lifting her glass with the grace of a queen addressing her court. "To the son who understands what it means to be a Graves, who knows that family is about building something together, not running away to play savior in some classroom." Her eyes landed squarely on me with those last words, sharp as glass. And just like that, every head at the table turned in my direction. Uncle Vernon, half pickled in bourbon, leaned forward with a grin too loose for the occasion. "Now hold on, Catherine. Shouldn't both your boys have had a fair shot? Nathaniel's no fool. He graduated summa cum laude, didn't he?" "From a state school," Catherine corrected instantly, the words crisp enough to sting. "With a degree in history. Tell me, what exactly would he contribute to a logistics empire? A lecture on Napoleon's battle strategies?" A ripple of laughter slipped through the room. Nervous, complicit, cruel. "I chose a different path," I said, my voice steady, though my hands tightened around the stem of my glass. "There's nothing wrong with teaching." "Different," my mother repeated with a soft laugh that wasn't soft at all. It was the laugh she reserved for cutting people down. That's one word for it. Nathaniel made his choice 5 years ago. He wanted to be noble, to make a difference. "Tell us, son, how much difference does 52,000 a year make?" 52, I corrected automatically. Her eyebrows lifted in mock surprise. "Oh, excuse me, 52. Julian's last bonus was more than you'll earn in the next 10 years. Julian leaned back, swirling his wine as if he'd been waiting for this moment. "Come on, Mother. Let's not turn this into a competition. We all make choices." "Yes, we do," she said, her voice gaining the rhythm of a sermon. "Some choose greatness. Others settle for mediocrity. Nathaniel had every advantage: private schools, the best connections, a guaranteed future at the company. And he tossed it aside to babysit teenagers who sleep through his lectures. They don't all sleep through them," I said quietly. From across the table, Claire spoke up, her tone gentle but firm. "One of his students just earned a full scholarship to Columbia." Catherine waved a dismissive hand. "One student? Julian just secured a contract that will employ 300 families. That's impact. That's legacy." The heat rose in my chest before I realized I was on my feet, my chair screeching across the polished hardwood. The sound sliced through the air like a blade, silencing even the uncles. "You know what?" I said, my voice carrying farther than I intended. "I have something to say." "Sit down," Catherine ordered, her words sharp enough to cut. Her eyes burned into me. "You're nothing but a failure, Nathaniel. A disappointment who squandered everything we gave you. So you could pretend to be a hero in some underfunded classroom. You have nothing. Nothing that anyone at this table wants to hear." The words clung to the air like smoke after a fire, choking the room into silence. Even Julian shifted uncomfortably, his eyes fixed on the swirl of red in his glass. "You're an embarrassment," Catherine pressed on, her voice rising as she rose to her feet. Her fury had a rhythm now, steady and merciless. "Do you know what I tell people when they ask about you? I say you're finding yourself. Because to admit my son teaches at a public school for poverty wages would be humiliating." "Catherine," my father said quietly, the bourbon softening his tone. But she wasn't finished. "No, Edward. He needs to hear it. Every year we sit here and pretend Nathaniel isn't the family failure. Well, I'm finished pretending. You could have been someone. You could have stood where Julian is standing tonight. Instead, you chose nothing. You are nothing. Exactly as I feared you'd be." The silence that followed was heavier than any applause, thicker than the perfume and bourbon mixed in the air. Aunt Patricia kept her eyes locked on her napkin, tracing invisible patterns into the linen. Uncle Vernon refilled his glass with shaking hands. Claire opened her mouth, but no words came, only the grief of someone watching a car crash in slow motion. "You're right," I said finally, the whisper sharp enough to cut the quiet. "I'm exactly who you think I am." Her eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" But I didn't answer. I turned and walked away, leaving the clinking glasses and hollow praise behind me. The celebration of Julian's ascension carried on, their laughter echoing faintly as I stepped into the hallway. The grand foyer stretched out before me, lined with the family portraits that mapped my gradual erasure. Photos of achievements, ceremonies, milestones, all shrinking, all rearranged until in the last one I was half hidden, more shadow than sun. The front doors groaned as I pushed them open. The November air hit like ice water across my face, cold, sharp and cleansing. My hands shook, though not from the chill. They shook from years, 28 years of clawing for recognition from people who had written my obituary as a failure long ago. The gravel crunched beneath my shoes with every step, each sound louder than the applause I'd left behind. Each step its own rebellion, a declaration that I was done begging for a place at their table. My Honda Civic sat at the edge of the drive, rust freckles on the hood, paint fading on the roof. Wedged between Julian's Tesla and my mother's Mercedes, it looked like a weed forcing its way through manicured stone. Imperfect. Out of place. But mine. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. My Civic sat there like an intruder among royalty, stubbornly refusing to die just like me. I fumbled for my keys, dropping them into the gravel before finally pulling them free. Behind me, muffled laughter leaked from the windows of the estate. Another toast, another round of praise for Julian. By now, my empty chair had probably been absorbed into the wallpaper, my absence barely noticed. "Nathaniel Graves," I spun, startled. A man stood 10 feet away, though I hadn't heard a single step on the gravel. He looked to be in his mid-50s, tall, with silver hair that glinted in the glow spilling from the house. He wore a black suit cut so clean it might as well have been carved. In one hand, he carried a leather briefcase that looked like it had its own security detail. "Who's asking?" I said, more tired than angry. After the night I'd had, I wasn't in the mood for solicitors, process servers, or whatever fresh humiliation this was. "My name is Harrison Cole," he said evenly. "Attorney with Cole and Associates." His eyes flicked to the mansion, then back to me, measuring something. "I've been trying to reach you for 3 months. Your family has been thorough in keeping my letters and calls from you." I let out a humorless laugh. "If this is about debt collection or some lawsuit, you've picked the wrong night." "It isn't." He stepped closer, the light catching his face. There was something there, not pity, but a kind of quiet understanding, like he'd seen this scene before. "Your grandfather, William Graves, left specific instructions that I deliver something to you. And only you, on your 28th birthday. That was 3 months ago." My breath caught. "Grandpa Will. He'd died when I was 10, leaving behind nothing but peppermint candies, the scent of cedar from his workshop, and stories about model trains we never finished building together." "That's impossible. He's been gone almost 2 decades. "Yes," Cole said. "And yet he knew exactly what your family would become. He anticipated this moment." His tone shifted now, the professional mask tightening into something sharper, urgent. "Mr. Graves, I've been practicing law for over 30 years. I've handled hundreds of wills, executed countless estates. I've never seen provisions like these." He raised the briefcase slightly, as if presenting evidence in court. The polished brass clasps gleamed under the porch light. I stared at it, pulse hammering in my throat. Something about the moment felt dangerous, like the air before a storm. One choice meant getting into my Civic, driving back to my apartment, returning to the small, ordinary life that everyone here believed defined me. The other meant opening that case, stepping into a world my grandfather had hidden, one my parents had fought to keep me from. "What's in it?" I asked, my voice low. Cole's eyes never left mine. "The truth," he said, "and it will change everything." "The truth," Harrison said quietly, like the words themselves carried weight. "The truth your family has gone to extraordinary lengths to hide from you. Your father knows I've been trying to reach you. He's had his attorneys send threats, filings, even cease and desist letters. He's warned me he'd bury my firm in lawsuits if I persisted. But your grandfather was very clear about the terms of delivery. And tonight those terms are fulfilled. I swallowed hard. What terms? You had to be 28, he said evenly. You had to have worked outside the family's empire for at least 5 years. And... He paused, his gaze flicking back to the mansion where laughter still leaked through the walls. You had to be cast out completely. Your grandfather called it the moment of clarity. The words hit me like a blow. My mind churned. How could he have known? How could anyone predict what happened tonight? The humiliation, the rejection, my mother's fury slicing me apart in front of everyone. Harrison's expression softened, though his eyes carried something sharper, something knowing. Because he knew his son. He knew Edward would grow into the man he became. He knew Catherine would defend it. He saw the trajectory years before you were born. Your grandfather was a lot of things, Nathaniel, but naive was never one of them. My eyes drifted to the briefcase. Its polished leather gleamed under the porch lights, a black mirror catching the reflection of the house I'd just left. And if I don't take it? I asked, my voice low. Then you get in your car. You drive away. Life continues as it has. The insults, the erasure, the quiet betrayals. The truth stays buried, and your grandfather's final wish dies with me. I felt something stir in my chest, a mixture of fear and defiance. His final wish? He called it the ultimate teaching moment. Harrison extended the case again, the gesture deliberate, almost ceremonial. He believed you'd understand when the time came. I thought of Grandpa Will, his work-worn hands guiding mine as we sanded wood, the scent of sawdust clinging to the air, the satisfaction of building something that lasted. While Julian studied for his fast-track internships and Catherine paraded him through boardrooms, I was in the workshop, learning how to turn nothing into something with patience and effort. They've kept this from you long enough, Harrison said, his voice cutting through my memories like a blade. I reached out. My fingers brushed the cool leather, and then I took the briefcase, its weight settling into my hands like judgment, like possibility. I clicked open the clasps right there in the driveway, and used the flashlight on my phone to reveal what my grandfather had left me, what my family had spent nearly 2 decades trying to erase. The first page was a letter, handwritten on thick cream stationery, the kind my grandfather always used when something mattered. My chest tightened the moment I recognized the looping, careful strokes of his pen. Dear Nathaniel, it began. If these words are in your hands, it means you've turned 28, and the family has revealed themselves for what they are. By now, you've likely been told you're a failure, that you squandered opportunity, that you chose mediocrity over greatness. Good. Let them believe it. The truth, as you'll see, is far more complicated. I swallowed, my hands trembling as I read. The empire your father parades as his own, he did not build it. Every cent came from me. That little story about the $5,000 seed loan, a fabrication, it was $5 million. And it came with conditions he's concealed for a quarter of a century. Graves Industries was never his to own. He was entrusted with it, nothing more. I lifted my eyes to Harrison. He gave a slow, steady nod, urging me to continue. Through a Delaware corporation called G&H Holdings, I retained controlling interest, 51%. Your father has known this all along. For years he's forged my name on documents, pretending I'd signed them. Hard to protest identity theft when you've been in the ground 18 years. But the truth is this. The controlling interest was never meant for him. It was meant to skip a generation. It belongs to you, my breath caught. You, the letter said. Not Julian. Not anyone else. Me. Do you remember sitting by my hospital bed when you were 8? You came not for inheritance or approval, but because you wanted to hear my stories. That is why I chose you, because you valued time over power and people over performance. Harrison quietly slid another document into my free hand. Heavy stock, embossed seals, legal signatures pressed into the paper. This, he said, is the ownership certificate for G&H Holdings. As of your 28th birthday 3 months ago, you became the rightful majority owner of Graves Industries. Every contract, every board vote, every decision your father and brother made since then is null without your authorization. This, my voice broke. This can't be real. It's real, Harrison said, calm but firm. Your grandfather was deliberate. He required you to live and work outside the family's shadow for at least 5 years. He wanted you to prove you could build a life without Graves' money propping you up. You've been teaching for 6. I looked back down at the paper. My grandfather's handwriting carried me further. Your father will deny everything. He'll call me senile, claim the documents are forgeries. He'll try to destroy the evidence. That's why I prepared recordings, every conversation where he acknowledged the true structure. Harrison keeps copies in a safety deposit box, along with 30 years of documentation. The truth cannot be erased. My throat tightened as the weight of it pressed down. For the first time in my life, the words in front of me weren't condemning me to smallness. They were handing me something enormous, something that could burn everything my family thought they controlled to the ground. I read the next lines of my grandfather's letter, my chest tight with disbelief. I watched your father become the man I feared he would. Hungry for power, careless with people, and willing to sacrifice anything decent for another rung on the ladder. I watched your mother cheer him on, blind to what it cost. But you, Nathaniel, you chose differently. You chose to build rather than strip, to teach rather than exploit, to raise others instead of crushing them beneath your ambition. That's why this company belongs to you. Graves Industries is valued at roughly $60 million today. It is yours, but remember, money is never the prize. It is only a tool. What matters is how you use it and what you build with it. I lowered the paper, my hands trembling. The driveway felt too narrow, the air too heavy with what I now held. My thumb hovered over my phone screen for a moment before I tapped Julian's number. He answered on the second ring, irritation dripping from his voice. What is it, Nate? Mom's in the middle of her toast. I need all of you to come outside, now, you, Mom, and Dad, especially Dad. There was a pause. Are you having some kind of episode? Just come. 2 minutes later, the door opened. Catherine stepped out first, her wine glass still in hand, wearing the kind of annoyed smile she saved for waiters who got her order wrong. Edward followed, expression tight with frustration, while Julian trailed behind, scrolling his phone like this was an inconvenience beneath him. What's this about? Catherine demanded. If this is another dramatic display because of what was said inside, let me save you the trouble. You needed to hear it. Mr. and Mrs. Graves, Harrison interrupted, his voice smooth as he stepped into the light. My name is Harrison Cole, executor of William Graves's private estate. Edward's face drained of color. In all my life I had never seen fear on him, but fear was there, plain as day. That's impossible, he said quickly. My father's estate was settled 18 years ago. The public estate, yes, Harrison said calmly. But not the private trust, not G&H Holdings. Catherine's glass slipped from her hand. It shattered against the stone driveway, the sound cutting through the night like a warning bell. Julian gave a nervous laugh. This is some kind of joke, right? A stunt? I lifted the document in my hand, the embossed seal catching the porch light. 51% controlling interest in Graves Industries. Every contract you've signed, every decision you've pushed through in the last 3 months is invalid without my consent. You're lying, Edward barked, but his voice cracked. Call your attorney, Harrison said evenly. Ask him about G&H Holdings. Ask him why he's been sending me threatening letters since July. Julian pulled out his phone, but Edward raised a hand sharply. Don't, he said, quieter this time. His jaw worked, his breath shallow. It's real. The words dropped like a stone in the silence that followed. Catherine turned to him, then to me, her mouth opening and closing, but nothing came out. For the first time in my life, Catherine Graves had nothing to say. 6 months later, I stood in the same dining room where they had once cut me to pieces. But this time everything was different. But the world inside that house was unrecognizable now. The gaudy portraits of long-dead Graves' ancestors had been taken down, replaced with photographs of our employees, smiling faces at summer cookouts, families building houses with Habitat for Humanity, kids sitting on Santa's lap at the holiday party. The dining table, once a monument to excess that could seat 20, was gone. We donated it to a shelter where it could finally serve people instead of egos. In its place sat a modest oak table, wide enough for good food and better conversation. Julian was half a world away in Thailand, finding himself, with the severance package I gave him. $2 million, more than he deserved, but enough to keep him from dragging the company into endless lawsuits. Last week he sent me an email. Just 2 words, I'm sorry. I haven't answered. Maybe one day I will, maybe I won't. Catherine and Edward moved to their Florida estate permanently. They were still wealthy, still comfortable, but stripped of the one thing they worshipped most: control. Dad fought the ownership transfer for exactly 3 days before his own lawyers spelled it out. Push any harder, and he'd be facing prison for fraud. Mom hasn't said a word to me since that night on the driveway. At a gala last month, she brushed past me as if I were invisible, which was fitting, especially since the charity she was parading for now existed on money I had personally donated. Chloe was the only one who stayed. The morning after Thanksgiving, she called in tears, apologizing for not defending me sooner. Over coffee last week, she warned, "You know they'll never forgive you." "They never forgave me for being myself either," I told her. "The only difference is I've finally stopped chasing their approval." The company, meanwhile, had become something I never thought possible. Every single one of our 800 employees stayed. But instead of being treated like replaceable cogs, they were given something my father never understood: dignity. We raised the minimum salary to $70,000 a year, introduced profit sharing, and launched a scholarship fund for employees' kids. Denise from accounting, who'd been overlooked for a promotion 17 times, was now our COO. At her first leadership meeting, she said it was the first time in 15 years she'd seen people excited to come into work. "Your grandfather would be proud," she told me. "He used to bring donuts for the warehouse crew every Friday. Your dad ended that tradition the day after the funeral. So I brought the donuts back. Profits dipped 8%, but productivity shot up 20%. Turns out people work harder when they feel valued." Who could have guessed? Julian's big Singapore expansion, his golden speech from Thanksgiving night, I scrapped it. That money went into better health coverage, full family insurance for every employee. For once, our workers didn't have to choose between paying a mortgage and buying their kids' asthma medication. And me? I still kept one foot in the classroom. Every Tuesday morning, I taught a single history class at the high school. The principal offered to name a building after me when she learned about the inheritance. I declined. The students didn't need to know their teacher was worth $60 million. All they needed to know was that someone believed in them. That was enough. They didn't need a miracle. They just needed someone who actually showed up, listened, and cared about where their lives were headed. Harrison Cole wasn't just a lawyer who delivered a sealed envelope. Over time, he became something closer to the grandfather I lost too soon. Once a month, we'd grab dinner and he'd share stories about Grandpa Will. Stories no one in my family had ever bothered to tell me. He saw it all coming. Harrison said last night over steaks. "Even the way your mother would drop her glass of wine." He told me it would happen the moment she realized her power was only an illusion. Grandpa Will had a way of understanding people long before they revealed themselves. On the wall of my office now hangs his letter, framed beside an old photo of the two of us building model trains at the kitchen table. But there's a section of that letter I've never shared with anyone, not even Chloe. It was the line that explained everything. "Nathaniel, your family will call you a failure for choosing to teach. Let them. Because every young person you guide, every spark of curiosity you ignite, every life you leave better than you found it. That's success they'll never grasp. Money gets lost and rebuilt. Companies crash and recover. But a teacher builds futures. That's why I chose you. Not because you'll run the business more skillfully than Julian, though I believe you will, but because you understand something they don't. Success without purpose is just failure dressed in gold." That briefcase Harrison handed me on the driveway that night still sits in my office. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. The truth takes its time, but when it finally surfaces, it shifts the ground under your feet. This inheritance wasn't just about wealth. It was about freedom. The freedom to define success on my own terms. And maybe that's the sweetest form of revenge against the people who laughed at me, dismissed me, called me the failure son. To succeed without ever playing by their rules. Now, every Thanksgiving, I open the company headquarters to anyone who needs a seat at a family table. Employees without relatives nearby, or anyone who just wants to be seen for who they are, not for what their paycheck says. Last year, nearly 300 people filled the hall. We passed plates, shared stories, and raised our glasses to second chances, to teachers who become leaders, to Grandpa Will, who saw something in me no one else wanted to see. They kept the truth from me as long as they could, but truth has a way of breaking through. Like a good teacher, it won't rest until its lesson is heard.